Madam Clerk, we'll call this meeting to order.
Upon activation emergency alarm signal, all persons should immediately exit the building. Please use the exits to the left, right, or front of the council chamber or the east or west stairwell outside the rear doors of the chamber. Do not use elevators or escalators. After exiting the building, proceed down the 9th Street and enter the assembly area located in the former public safety building parking lot. Able persons should assist visually in hearing impaired visitors with exiting the building. Persons wishing to speak during the public comment period and/or public hearings are generally allowed 3 minutes to speak. Persons speaking before the committee are not allowed to campaign for public office, promote private business ventures, use language of a personal nature which assaults or demeans any person, including comments directed at public officials or staff members that are not related to their official duties, or address the question to staff members directly. All questions to be directed to the committee chair. Failure to adhere to the guidelines may result in speakers forfeiting any remaining time and further disciplinary action as necessary, which could include barring from attendance at future meetings of the committee for a period of 6 months. Members of the public who register in advance to speak virtually will be called at the appropriate time, either during the public comment period or during the public hearing for the legislation on which they signed up to address. Madam Chair, this concludes the announcements.
Madam Clerk, we're going to do a switch around. I'm sorry, I know we said we were going to proceed as usual, but we'll move the boards and commissions up and then we'll proceed with, we'll start with public comment, but then we'll proceed with the rest of the agenda items.
Did you want to knock out approval of the minutes?
Oh, yeah, we can go ahead and do that as well.
Okay, so you want to proceed with public comment, approve the minutes, and the board vacancies?
Correct.
Okay. Is there anyone here present today that would like to speak about items, that would like to provide comment to the committee? Please approach the podium and state your name for the record.
My name is Kim Taylor, and I am a member of the Richmond chapter of Virginia Organizing. I've been living in the 9th District for several decades. When we got a new management company a few years ago, we started seeing the effects of a lack of routine maintenance and slumlord power. In my apartment, I've had holes in my ceilings, faulty electrical wiring, and has caused shocks and rust, holes in my shower. The appliances are so old that they no longer make the parts to do repairs. And I've lost groceries because of poor repairs to my refrigerator. My family's health is suffering because of the poor conditions. My wife suffers from COPD, and my daughter has asthma. Due to the conditions we live in, we have called code enforcement multiple times to try and get problems repaired, but they did not show up. The last time they were supposed to, when they did come out 2 years ago, the property management was angry that I called. The property management and owners clearly don't care about residents' safety or privacy. We need a proactive rental inspection program in Richmond to hold property owners and landlords accountable without placing the burdens on tenants. I asked the city council and administration to fully fund a rental inspection program so that Richmond residents can have the safe and healthy housing we deserve. Thank you for letting me share.
Thank you.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being here. So I feel the same way. My mom is 83 years old. She's on 24-hour oxygen. She's been living in the same residence since beginning of 2015. The landlord has came and did no repairs, but it's always on time for the rent. The furnace she has a oil furnace, and because there's been no repairs, even with the furnace, when it gets cold, it cuts out, no heat. The trees are so high that it knocks the power out all the time. My mom's on 24-hour oxygen, you know. So, I mean, I would like to add that, I feel like not just for me and my mother's situation, just for everybody else, because it's not fair to them, We can be here, they're at home. But I mean, the windows are falling out, the whole window pane. The building inspector has came out. The mold, it's really bad. I have proof of everything that I'm talking about. We need a proactive rental inspection program now, because it's not fair to anyone, And the landlord, she was ready to throw me off the property, telling me my mom to come over here and deal with it. And she paid 2 months in advance before I had to take her home with me. The landlord's trying to throw me off the property, tell my mom to come. And she sued my mom. Actually, on Friday, I had to go to court for my mom because I believe it was fair that, since my mom had to come and stay with me because there was no heat, the water is contaminated, the power keeps cutting out, so my mom had to come stay with me. And it was the beginning of January. I have proof. My mom has proof that the oil was put in there. So she voluntarily put more oil in it, said, it didn't have oil. But anyway, I'm sorry. I apologize. But yeah, my mom is at home and I'm fighting
You have
to
30
try to help.
seconds.
Yes, thank you. We need some proactive, this program, please. Thank you so much for your time.
Ma'am,
Thank you.
could you please state your name for the record?
Jennifer Loper,
Thank you.
thank you.
My name is Paul Fleischer. I am a retired Richmond Public Schools teacher and a member of Virginia Organizing. We want to thank both our council members and Dr. Vonk as well for meeting with us and others over the past 2 years as we've worked together to develop a rental inspection program. My wife and I own a single rental property in Richmond's first district. We know how difficult it is for tenants to find affordable housing. The last time our one apartment became available, more than 30 people contacted us on the first and only day it was advertised. And as educators, we've known students who have struggled in school because their family's housing is unstable. Everyone deserves a decent place to live. We're glad Richmond has committed to the principle when City Council began the process of creating the rental housing inspection program. Unfortunately, lower income renters are often forced by circumstance to live in inadequate housing. The inspection plan should identify and remedy some of the city's worst substandard apartment complexes. We must ensure that the existing affordable housing stock in Richmond is preserved and maintained. The only way to do that is to hold the worst slumlords accountable for failing to keep their apartments in livable condition. The inspection ordinance will also put other property owners and managers on notice that they too must maintain their properties in decent condition. Unfortunately, the inspection program has yet to be implemented. City Council must finish this task as soon as possible. We support the creation of inspection districts narrowly defined as individual tax ID properties or single housing complexes. rather than identifying larger parcels of land or entire neighborhoods within the city. Henrico County has already successfully adopted just such an approach. City Council must move this task forward by deciding how to select rental properties for inspection, how
You have
tenants,
30 seconds.
thank you, how tenants can be included in the process of identifying substandard housing, and what fees would be required of landlords whose properties are inspected. It's time for Richmond to institute its promised rental inspection program. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Caroline Toby. I'm a student support coach at the UMFS at United Methodist Family Services in our Child and Family Healing Center. I am physically unable to drive, and therefore I'm a full-time bus rider. I currently reside in the Museum District, and in order for me to travel to see my family down in Hopewell and Charles City, I would have to take an hour and 50-minute bus ride for what would have been a 30 to 45-minute car ride. This is why I strongly urge you to consider to expand frequent and far-reaching transit across the Tri-Cities area so that all riders can have their desired employment and entertainment opportunities. Thank you for your time.
Madam Clerk, do we have any speakers online?
Yes, we do. Emma White, if you are unable, you should be unable to unmute your mic and provide your comment to the committee.
Hello, my name is Emma White. I'm a member of the Richmond chapter of Virginia Organizing. I'm personally lucky enough to live in a house where I can easily fix issues and make sure things like mold and leaks aren't problems that I have to deal with on a daily basis. But unfortunately, I know there are countless Richmond residents who can't say the same. I've heard personal accounts of truly horrific housing conditions of several tenants in multiple apartments across the city, things like ceilings falling down on elderly residents, or mold growing on every surface, including couches and beds. No one should ever be subjected to unhealthy or, in some cases, completely uninhabitable living conditions. Sadly, in many parts of the city, this is happening. The fact that Richmond has one of the highest eviction rates in the country while also subjecting numerous residents to unsafe and unhealthy housing conditions is a sad truth, but it doesn't have to stay that way. I realized how crucial the rental inspection program is thanks to a meeting I attended back in December of last year. Hearing firsthand accounts from chapter members was incredibly impactful. As a resident of Chesterfield myself, I wasn't aware of the magnitude of the situation, but thanks to the Richmond residents that shared their stories, I was fully able to grasp how dire it is. So I truly believe that anyone who hears the stories of Richmond tenants will immediately understand the gravity of the situation, and thus I think it's extremely important to hold well-advertised public hearings on the ordinance, hopefully in the very near future, to provide an opportunity to hear tenant feedback firsthand. I'm completely confident that any questions of relevance or importance of this program would evaporate. Again, as a non-Richmond resident myself, whose living situation isn't actually directly affected by this issue, I can personally attest to the impact of the tenants' stories. And then just overall, I think it's important that the city must create a proactive property-based inspection program that holds property owners accountable and protects tenants. I'm asking the City Council and the administration to fully fund the Richmond rental inspection program immediately. Thank you.
We have a Thomas Courtney. Mr. Courtney, if you're online, you should be able to unmute your mic and provide your comment.
Yes, good afternoon, Chairperson and members of the committee. Ms. Robertson previously advised that I speak here. My name is Thomas Courtney, and I'm here representing Floyd Grove Shepherd LLC regarding land use compliance at 2915 Grove Avenue, the site of a warehouse construction on residential land. We respectfully request that this committee take action to enforce the Special Use Permit Ordinance 1987-193-185, which explicitly limits development on this parcel to parking and landscaping improvements as an accessory to the corner structure. Despite this, a plan of development has been erroneously approved for a storage warehouse as an accessory to an adjacent property, a clear violation of the ordinance and zoning allowances. This is not a new issue. The city previously enforced the 1987 ordinance under Code Case 038774 in 2020, confirming its applicability by the same zoning administrator. That was over a fence. This is a 12,000 square foot warehouse. If the city no longer believes the ordinance should apply, then it must be formally repealed through proper legislative process, not just ignored in favor of a wealthy nonprofit. To ensure proper governance and uphold transparency, we request this committee to direct enforcement of the 1987 ordinance or add an agenda item to formally consider its repeal, allowing for public input and legislative due process. Therefore, I ask that the committee chair move that the topic of enforcing or repealing Ordinance 1987-193-185 be included in the upcoming committee agenda for discussion and action. Thank you for your time and commitment to responsible land use in Richmond.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. We can move on with the approval of the minutes.
The minutes to be approved are from the January 21st, 2025 Land Use, Housing, and Transportation Standing Committee meeting. If there are no amendments or corrections, then those meeting minutes stand approved as presented. Those minutes have been approved.
Thank you. We can move on.
Good afternoon, Pamela Nichols, Council Management Analyst. The packet before you, well, of course, you all have a binder of the applications that we received for the Public Art Commission. We did process over 89 applications. Some individuals did not meet the parameters to be considered, but included in the binder are 70 applications. Also want to make you aware, pursuant to Ordinance 2024-212, which established the Public Art Commission, what we're asking the committee to do today, if you desire to make recommendations, those recommendations would then go to City Council for interim appointment, because the code states that appointments cannot be made until June, with the terms begin in July 1. And so to continue the efforts that has already been started with the Public Arts Commission, it has been requested that members that are appointed, that they will be appointed on an interim basis, but those same members council would then make a final appointment of those individuals in July. Okay, so again, like I said, we had 70 applications. I know that Chairwoman Jones was also involved. So if you would like, I would just go over the names of the individuals that have been recommended.
Before you do that, is it possible to share why we're going to do the interim and then the full appointment in July?
Yes, because the ordinance states that appointments will be considered in June, and then applications will be considered in June, and then appointments, the terms will start in July 1. However, because there is a gap between July 1 and this current period, the request has been made so that work can begin, that individuals will be appointed on an interim basis.
Because how long has the committee not been active?
I'm sorry?
How long has the committee not been active?
If I may, can I ask Monica? And of course, this is Monica Kinsey, Secretary to the Public Art.
Hello, I'm Monica Kinsey, the Planner Secretary for the Public Art Commission. The commission last met in November. The ordinance required the dissolution of the existing iteration of the commission in order for appointments to move forward for the new body.
Actually, well, maybe so. Did we rebuild the Art Commission under a new definition over the past year? And causing us to dissolve the current membership and now be off cycle. Is that what happened?
Yep, exactly. The ordinance, it's number 2024-212, passed at the end of September, and restructured the Public Art Commission. And so in order for the new structure of the commission to go into effect, the dissolution of the existing commission was required.
I see. Thanks.
We just needed that clarification and really that understanding of the committee specifically for new member Brenton to understand that it was dissolved and then possibly, in the process of rebuilding it. So thank you.
And also the composition of the commission will consist of 8 members being appointed by council and 1 member being appointed by the mayor. And so again, we received recommendations and I would like to go over them at this time if you all would like. Okay, so the first recommendation is for Andrea Armand, 3rd District resident. Brian Barr, 2nd District resident. And the composition also suggests that a member of UDC would serve, and so that would be Jesse Jimmer. Holly Gordon, 1st District resident. And then also it recommends for a member of City Council, and that person would be Chairwoman Jones. Ricky Parker, 6th District employment. Tayron Sparks, 6th District employment. And lastly, Elizabeth Wright, 5th District employment. And we are still waiting for a recommendation to come from the mayor's office.
Okay. Thank you. I'm happy to hear that there are some recommendations. But I find it quite interesting the number of people that have put in an application to serve on this board, which speaks volume to the significance of art in the city of Richmond, which is fantastic. I am supporting our chair and your recommendations to move forward with these names as interim representatives.
Yeah, I'll make the motion or second it that we would support that slate of recommendations as well.
Who delivered the motion?
In that case, I second it.
Thank you. The committee is voting on the motion to forward the board recommendations for the Public Arts Commission as stated to council with the recommendation to approve. Mr. Brenton?
Aye.
Vice Chair Robertson? Chair Jones?
Aye.
That motion has been approved.
Thank you.
Madam Clerk, we can move with the presentations.
Good afternoon. Kim J. Vonk, Director of Planning and Development Review. I am here to talk about a residential rental inspection program. I'm also joined here by my colleague, Deputy Director Michelle Coward. Right there, I was just looking for, she'll be here to answer all the tough questions that you have. So what I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about an overview and pointing this in the wrong direction. No? All right. So what is a residential rental inspection program? The parameters for having a program are, I will say, explicitly and narrowly defined by Code of Virginia. What it is, it promotes safe, decent, and sanitary housing in residential rental dwelling units in a manner consistent with general law and then the authorities set forth in Code of Virginia. And this is the specific section that we're basing this program upon. It allows us and you, the governing body, to establish geographical districts, which permits building officials or their designees to conduct proactive inspections of residential rental dwelling units within it. And how this differs is currently, as we respond to complaints, that we need the consent of the owner or the tenant to enter to do an inspection. This would establish some parameters, of course, in accordance with federal law about entry, but to do proactive inspections of units on a specified basis. So what a program would entail is that council creates one or more rental inspection districts. There is a specific rule. You cannot create a rental inspection district that is your whole municipality. You have to pick what that district is. It authorizes the Commissioner of Buildings to inspect residential rental dwelling units periodically and upon property transfer. For larger complexes that have 10 or more units, you're allowed to inspect 10% of the total units. In those cases, if you do have a finding in one of those units, you are allowed to inspect all of the units. New and compliant dwelling units are exempt from periodic and transfer inspections for 48 months. So 4 years, so something new that comes online has, I'll say, a grace period before it can be inspected. But I think it's also important to remember that a rental inspection program does not negate the ability of the Commissioner of Buildings to respond to tenant or citizen complaints. So just because we're on, let's say you have an inspection, you pass, and so you have that 4 years till we inspect again. We do the inspection on Monday, and if on Wednesday there's a code issued, you can call and request an inspection for us to come in and re-inspect that premises for compliance. So I think really what's most important to talk about is creating these districts in which we would conduct proactive inspections. The governing body may establish these districts. And again, Code of Virginia defines this as residential rental dwelling units that are blighted in the process of deteriorating or warrant inspection by the building official to prevent blight or deterioration. And as many of you know, those are pretty, I'll say, expansive words in terms of thinking about, well, what does blight mean? And so with that, although per law, your decisions and the creation of districts need to reflect this criteria, we felt it would be good to recommend in the ordinance some discussion of criteria that council could use in its decision-making for creating these districts. And so I think, in terms of defining blight or deterioration, some things that we would recommend is the number of building code or health code violations in the previous 48 months, the number of incidents requiring public safety or emergency service response in the previous 48 months, or the number of tenants of residential rental dwelling units who have petitioned in writing the commissioner to address health, safety, and well-being conditions within their complexes. And we feel this is very important in terms of, again, when asking for these proactive inspections to happen, that we're doing so at the behest of the tenants who want their units to be inspected. So how do we set district boundaries? One approach on one end of the spectrum is Fairfax City. The neighborhoods that are shaded in blue are the rental inspection districts. And a few years ago, they went to add a few districts in red. So Fairfax City, in my opinion, is saying, hey, most of our city is blighted, and we need to go forth and do very proactive inspections throughout really all the neighborhoods, almost all the neighborhoods in our community. On the other hand, and as mentioned earlier by one of the public speakers, is Henrico County. Earlier this year, they added their second rental inspection district, which was St. Luke Apartments. And they have taken a very, I'll say, precise and surgical approach to just identifying particular parcels or complexes that warrant inspection. So I think in terms of establishing the program and setting district boundaries, things that we should consider, and this has come up through conversations with various parties and involved in or subject to rental inspection. I think it's important to look at the demographics of residents within the proposed districts and how do those compare to the demographics of the greater neighborhood and the city. Asking what resources will be needed to handle situations where tenants become unhoused. I think Ms. Carver will tell you, and I will say the same thing, is that our inspectors cannot unsee things. And we have an obligation, if there's a code violation and a code violation, again, our inspectors work hard in terms of declaring a building unsafe or unfit. That is an option of last resort, right? That is the last thing we want to do is unhouse somebody. But some cases, that is the option. Or that is the only way in terms of a particular code violation. And we know with Virginia landlord-tenant law, that landlord is responsible, right, for rehousing that tenant somewhere else. If I can't house you in the unit that you're renting and you're paying rent, I need to house you somewhere else. But we also understand from a practical matter, some of these landlords, right, would not let that unit get to that condition. Maybe don't have the resources to rehouse you somewhere else. And so there's a very real chance if somebody becomes subject to this and we have a finding that they could become unhoused. So just making sure if we do this, that we have resources available for landlords who don't provide that alternative housing. And then also when we talk about establishing these districts, especially ones that begin to encompass, whole neighborhoods. How does that impact the perception of the neighborhood and how it's deemed? Especially, again, because creating a district says that we're saying the rental units in this district are blighted. And how does that impact future investment in that district, both from existing residents and also future residents? So in terms of our recommendation from staff is to adopt an ordinance to establish a residential rental inspection program. Again, in accordance with Code of Virginia, we have drafted some legislation that we're working with the city attorney's office on, vetting in terms of establishing the framework for such a program. I think one of the things that we would look to insert into the legislation would be to have a provision that a district expires after 10 years. So that way, in terms of keeping things current, that would allow for 2 rounds of inspection within it. Those districts could be reauthorized or extended if problems still persist. But in essence, again, to not maybe necessarily permanently put property or neighborhood into that inspection in perpetuity. I think it's important that we, continue to look at those districts and then amend the ordinance in the future as needed to establish districts in accordance with the guiding criteria. And I think what we're recommending is taking this ordinance in 2 parts. And that is the first part is to adopt legislation that mirrors Code of Virginia to establish a residential rental inspection program. To get that on the books so we're ready to go. And then second, come back with an amendment to have a discussion about districts and amend the ordinance to create districts. And so that is, I think, part of the discussion in terms of data that we can provide council to help make that decision, providing an opportunity to make tenants aware that we have this provision on our books. And if they would like to come forward and petition to have their complex or their neighborhood included in that, I think that allows us to have a more robust discussion about the districts themselves rather than the particulars of the programs. So our recommendation would be to take this ordinance in 2 parts. First, to adopt the program, and then second, to come back and talk about districts. So that is what I have for a presentation, and happy to answer any questions.
So, is it accurate to say that the type of inspection that we would be doing would mirror the type of inspection that we would do if we've received a complaint or a request? And this is simply a more proactive way of performing those inspections. Otherwise, it's the type of inspection that we would already be doing by the same, very similar type of inspector, with potentially similar outcomes in terms of flagging a unit as being unfit. And the only difference becomes the proactiveness of it.
Correct. And in terms of the I like to say our inspectors are there to look at the structure. They're to look, primarily at compliance. I mean, their job is compliance with the building code. The primary focus is on life safety matters in terms of things that could pose a real life safety aspect. But yes, in terms of the inspections that are conducted, those would be just in accordance with how we conduct inspections right now.
And so I remember I've heard concerns about this possibly causing displacement when people are, and if a place is deemed unfit to live. And I suppose that's a situation that already can happen. And so the concern would then be just that we might increase the number of times that might happen. Is that fair to say?
Yes. So I think right now, right, when let's say a tenant calls us and we go perform an inspection and find, again, and I will say declaring something unfit or unsafe as last resort. But if we do declare that, then the landlord is responsible for rehousing that individual. And if they don't, that person may become unhoused. So that is a possibility currently with our reactive inspections. And I would say the potential could be increased with a proactive inspection. The same situation could happen.
Can you clarify? You mentioned a 10-year cycle being able to apply for 2 rounds of inspection. Can you say how that 2 rounds, what that means?
Sure. So once you establish a district, right, you set a timeline that you can go in and do a preliminary inspection. And for a larger complex, right, you get to pick 10% of the units. If you have a finding, non-compliance in one of those units of that sample, then you're allowed to inspect every unit within that complex. After those units become compliant, then you are not allowed to do another proactive inspection for another 4 years. And so there would be 4 years, you do it again, and then another 4 years, you do it again. And so that's what I'm saying in terms of there would really kind of be 3 inspections in there, a preliminary, intermediate, and kind of a final. So within that 8 years, you'd have 3 inspections. Again, that does not negate any reactive inspections. If someone were to call and have us go in and inspect, that doesn't impact that cycle. And so that's what I'm saying in terms of time frame, in terms of having a 10-year period would allow for 3 inspections. And I think by that third, I would say I would likely recommend is if you went in and a complex passed, in year 1, year 5, and year 9, that, all right, you let that district expire. But if there were findings all 3 times, then council may want to consider doing another term for that district.
All right, I think this is my last question is, I know you mentioned some criteria that we could use to decide on these zones. Would you recommend that we actually go so far as to specify like the numerical count of these issues, or rather that we just use those as the data that we collect, and then at the time, we do a more subjective community-based discussion using that information as a guide?
Sure. The Commonwealth only requires you to basically come to the conclusion, right, that there's blight within the district. I think in terms of information that you use, that is something that our staff can help provide in terms of making that determination. I would just say I don't know if I would recommend there's a specific number or threshold that you have to hit, because I think it's contextual. And then I would also say it also, really also depends on the tenants and a tenant desire for that. And I would, maybe caution against or not requiring a threshold of tenants. And let's say there's an apartment complex with 100 units. I think it would make a difference is it 1 tenant who comes forward? Is it 10 tenants? Is it 30 tenants? But in terms of like establishing an actual number threshold, I would not recommend looking at that. I'd look at it, kind of contextually.
Yeah, so I can absolutely see the benefit of this program as removing the responsibility of these tenants to have to put themselves potentially at risk of retribution from their landlord or fear of involvement with legal systems. And so I can definitely see the value of us taking a proactive approach in these zones. That's all my questions. Thanks.
Gibson is on the line and she has her hand raised to provide questions or comments to the committee.
Ms. Robinson was next, so she could follow her, and Ms. Lynch is also online.
Thank
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation, and I am thrilled that we are.
Ms. Gibson, Ms. Robertson will provide her comments and then you'll be able to provide yours. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. When we've talked about this in the past, one of my major concerns is the tenants' protection, both for the condition of housing that they're living in, that we've had, speakers today to speak of, very, very unsafe conditions that people are living in. So protection as it relates to the inspection, hopefully we would address that and give us an opportunity to make sure that for these persons that are renting, landlords are held accountable to have their properties within codes and decent, safe places for people to live. The other side of the tenant protections that I'm concerned about is that when we in the process of doing inspections and we find violations and the landlord is charged with the responsibility of making those corrections. I want a better understanding of what that requires. There's a citation to the landlord. They have a certain length of time to make the repairs. What is their obligation? How do you make the obligation of whether or not the tenant needs to be relocated, and what are the options that will be available to us if for some reason the landlord does not relocate the resident? And secondly, if the landlord make a decision that, okay, I'm going to bring my property up to standards, but it's going to cost me money to do that. And in order to cover the debt that I'm going to incur, I'm going to increase the rent, which may be another means by which the tenant rights to have safe housing will not be achieved. I'm concerned about the unintended consequences to the tenant, that our ordinance that you bring before us include the provisions to ensure that those concerns that I have, and probably even other concerns as well, are covered and addressed in a way that the due diligence of responsibility is on the landlord and that the tenant does not face adverse consequences with not being able to be relocated, being evicted, not evicted in the traditional term of eviction, but if the rent goes up and they can't pay, then they don't have housing. And we don't have, in the city, role in that process because we've gone in, we've done the inspection, we've done what's right. But if the landlord is not obligated, and we have no means of making them obligated without adverse, how does the ordinance that is presented to us addressing those concerns? And lastly, can we have a copy, a template of the ordinance that you would propose and recommend to us to consider? Thank you.
Councilwoman Robinson, that was a whole lot of information. Yes,
Yeah,
ma'am.
well, I had to get it out because, I was probably.
So from a code enforcement perspective, and this will be across the board, whether we're doing it under the rental program or our current program that we have in place for enforcement of the Virginia Maintenance Code, we do written notification to the owners and or responsible person for any violations that we find, establishing a time frame that they need to come into compliance. That time frame varies from just regular routine maintenance. You may need to paint because you got chipping and peeling paint, to the fact that it's heat season and you don't have heat. So we start at 30 days for regular routine defective maintenance, and we will typically go up to immediate to 15 days for unsafe conditions. So we look at exactly what's going on and who's being affected when we conduct the inspection. So there has been times where we've had to do an immediate vacate because of the conditions, but for most situations, we try to afford the owner to come into voluntary compliance and allow that time for that to happen. They will have the opportunity for an extension if they need to get permits and or working toward compliance, but things happen that require that time frame to be adjusted. However, we do everything in our power not to allow a tenant to stay in a situation that's unsafe or unfit. So we will ask the owner, could they place them in a hotel while they work on bringing it up so they can come back? Can they move them to another unit? So we are typically in in-depth conversations when owners and management companies want to have that conversation with us, to help them work through that at the most expeditious way while not allowing our tenants to be in an unsafe condition while that is going on. I think that may speak to the timeframes and things like that you've asked. One of the biggest things that you hit on that we always bring back to the table, as we've talked about this rental program over every 3 years for the last 20 years, is that we can't control our landlords and our management company. And what we find when we deal with some of them, they're out of state and they have a management company. We can take our management company to court and we can take landlords to court. If our landlord is out of state, getting them into court from New York or DC or Florida is, unless something new comes in within our legislative ability, is almost next to impossible. And so then we go after that management company because they've signed an agreement to make sure that property is maintained on behalf of that landlord. And guess what? They fired the management company. And that person now is no longer employed at that apartment complex. And then we literally have to start that process over, notifying the new management company, going through that education process, going through that partnership and working with them to try to get these units to meet minimum code standard. And that's where, code enforcement keeps hitting this brick wall where there is some legislation that says the property owner can be issued a summons. How then do we get that summons served to them if they're not within our boundaries where we can reach them? And then, like I said, changing the management company is dissolving the agreement. At the time they're under the agreement, they are the responsible person. But once that agreement, that contract between them and that owner is no longer in place, they have no right to be on the property, have no right to do any business on behalf of the owner to the property. So we recognize that as something that we're going to have to figure out. How do we close that gap? We deal with it now every day, just in our routine property maintenance, just day to day what we do. How do we get that to happen? Of course, it's a lot easier when it's small, minor things that the landlord has to fix. But when you're talking about putting thousands of dollars in it, then their communication with us tends to change. Their commitment tends to change. Up front, it may be a lot of conversation, a lot of, yes, we're going to do that. And so we're working toward that path. And all of a sudden, the rules change on their end. And we still have a situation where we have properties that do not meet the minimum standard. And we're trying to find a way to ensure that the citizens and the tenants are not affected. And like you stated, the city cannot place someone somewhere. And that's what Kevin stated in his presentation, having something in place that if we do have a situation where we have to unhouse, the city has something or somebody or somewhere we can send the tenants to at least start the process of getting help. I don't know, what that would look like. It may be another conversation, but definitely before we actually start that enforcement action, should we decide that this is the way we want to go as a city, we would like to be able to see that and know that it's going to provide some relief.
Could you please provide your name and title for the record?
I'm sorry, Michelle Coward. I'm the Deputy Director for Property Maintenance Code Enforcement. You're more than welcome.
The other part, some other parts of the question which asked was as it relates to, and I want to come back to some of the things that you've already answered. Because what troubles me about this is the tenant is the person that is experiencing this unhealthy living environment. They're paying their rent. As a part of our strategy, would we include providing assistance to the tenants to put their rent in an escrow account instead of continuing to pay directly to the landlord?
I would definitely recommend that we have a person, of course, it cannot be one of our staff because of conflict, but a person. So typically now, we send them to legal aid when we have a tenant that's in that situation and we say, hey, you know, you don't have to pay rent if your landlord is not upholding the lease, but we can't give you legal advice, but go to legal aid. Here's their phone number, explain to them what's going on, and they can walk you through what that escrow process looks like. We can provide them a copy of the notice so that they will have a list of those violations that exist, documentation that that owner has been put on notice. And most times when they go to do the escrow, that owner has already passed that abatement date. So it's showing that the owner is not trying to come into compliance. So when they do escrow and they go before the judge, they have, you know, that documentation and that story to tell on their behalf to the judge, and then he or she would make that determination as to, you know, what they get back from the escrow, if they hold the owner accountable for any other things that the tenant may have incurred as a result of not being able to enjoy the property by which they went into a lease agreement with.
Okay. Thank you. I have a lot of questions about this because, and I know what I'm asking is what if this, what if that, and you know, that can go on forever. But I am concerned that the program that we present to us, to the greatest extent that we can push our capacity legally to make it extremely uncomfortable for the landlord to continue to collect rent, and that the tenant does not suffer any consequences because of it. To the degree that we can write those provisions into this ordinance, even the escrowing, I know you said we can't provide legal counseling, but if the ordinance can say that it is the position of the city to provide information about escrow accounts and so forth, that educational piece and so forth. I want this ordinance to be written as tight as it can to close any potential loophole or gap that the landlord can use, including rent gouging, increasing the rent. And I would also want to know, in addition to the escrowing of the rent, because we've issued a citation and the landlord does not provide provisions to relocate the resident if that is necessary based on our findings, if there is some way that the part of their rent can be used to cover the hotel costs, rather than having to just put money in there and then, you know, maybe come out of that pocket. I don't know if any of those things are options that we should consider. But you get the sentiments of what I'm asking. And I would like to have a draft of the proposed program ordinance that you would like for us to consider. And then perhaps, Madam Chair, we can react to that if we feel that there are other provisions that we'd like to see written into the ordinance before we do the final introduction and ultimately take this up. Now, the complaint that I'm getting in addition to that is we've been taking a long time to get to where we're going, and we still are not where we want to go. And so some type of timeline as to how we can close this in and make this a reality would be exceptionally beneficial. And I would hope that with your ordinance, you will also include, when it asks you for the fiscal impact, that you be frank with us as to what we need for administration and any other provisions that we need to put in place to make sure that we can be effective in accomplishing the bottom line, which is safe, affordable, decent housing for people to live in. And I'll wait until I get the ordinance and then we'll follow up with additional recommendations and questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Would you like me? I'm going to try and answer quickly. Four-part question. So as for the first two, as far as provisions in the ordinance, I'm not going to put the city attorney on the spot, but I think in terms of discussing opportunities for us to provide education for individuals, I think from a practical matter, that's something we've discussed and we have in our SOPs that we do to the extent possible that we're permitted. I think we can talk about inserting that in the ordinance. The one thing that we probably won't be able to do is provisions about rent control or price gouging. I don't believe, at least through this section of code, we would be authorized to do that. That might be a separate conversation in terms of like what we can do in terms of rent. I will say one of the comments that we have heard is that, look, my landlord is raising the rent and going to raise the rent regardless because this is a very attractive market. So the least they can do if they're raising my rent is at least give me a safe, sanitary place to live. And so in terms of having those inspections by holding the landlord accountable, like, look, if you're going to raise the rent, at least provide the basic necessities that you need to do through that housing. I'm in support of that. As far as like the rent increase price, I think that would have to be a separate conversation outside of this particular program. In terms of then coming back and having that draft, we've been working with the city attorney's office on a draft of establishing that program. I think we can have that back to you very shortly, and I'll say like this spring in terms of having something ready for introduction. In terms of the fiscal impact, if we approach it in two parts, the first part, there is no fiscal impact. The second part, and I think why the recommendation to separate is to have that discussion about our districts and how much we're creating. That will be the fiscal determinant of then, all right, estimating how many inspectors will be needed to perform these proactive inspections. And so I think that is the second piece of the conversation and why, recommending separating is that, hey, let's have a conversation about districts, because if you decide to create districts with 100 units in versus 1,000 units in, that's a very different fiscal impact in terms of like what we might need in terms of resources to conduct those inspections.
So just one other recommendation. In the discussion in regards to this, we talked about in our housing authority communities, there is a requirement for tenant organization. With the designation creating an opportunity for education and how to form a tenant organization, tenant rights, tenant processes of how they do certain things and so forth, and providing support training for tenant organizing, and also considering when we work with our Office of Community Wealth Building and our training program, job training programs, looking at ways that we can train residents, tenants, to be housing inspectors is another way of building strength in the tenants, knowing their rights and what they can do, and also providing an opportunity for them to be a beneficiary and a partner in providing decent, safe, affordable housing. Those are just some of the other considerations when we talk this ordinance. I think this ordinance is really, really important that we make it as compound as we probably can, even to the edge, okay, is where I feel like we need to be with that. And so I look forward to receiving your draft and furthering this conversation. And I encourage the citizens that came down today to stay in touch with us. You're listening. You got ideas that we probably haven't thought about. You know, our door is open, our ears are wide open. The city is obligated and committed and want to do this. We just want to do it to the best of our ability. So please don't hesitate to continue to pick up the phone. Thank you.
Ms. Gibson.
Thank you. And I'm very thankful to hear this discussion. Some thoughts and questions that I had. One, to begin, I think, you know, it's important to establish what the goal of this is, which I believe is essentially to reduce the number of violations that we're seeing occurring, and to reduce the number of evictions that we are having residents of the city experience. And so, you know, to that end, you know, it would really be helpful to see some of that data as we are making these decisions. You know, I'm curious to know, you know, how many of our residents are renters. I in the document that linked to, I think, what Fairfax City shared and put together, they included some like the percentage of the residents in Fairfax City that were renters, and I think that like the national benchmark was like 64% or something. And I'm curious to know, you know, where we fall in terms of how many people, you know, face the kind of you know, having less control essentially over what their living circumstances are, whether it is in the rent that they're having to pay or the living conditions. So I think that would be helpful information to have. And also, you know, how many violations are we seeing today? You know, where are we seeing those violations occur? What types of violations are we seeing occur? I think that will also be important data to have as we're considering how the districts are defined. I was, you know, am intrigued. I think we have the benefit of not being the first on this, you know, and I think while it certainly would have been, I think, to residents' advantage had we established the program, you know, a decade ago. But now at least we're in a position where we can learn from what these other municipalities have done and use that to optimize the program to serve our residents best. And so, you know, as I understand it in Henrico, there were essentially there was one property that was receiving an excessive number of complaints. And so the program was established to address that very singular problem. And then I think that they then earlier this year expanded it to include, you know, a second property. And I don't know that that's, you know, from what I'm hearing, that's what the issue is in Richmond. I don't think we have just one or two, you know, problematic properties. And so, you know, if we were to take the approach of defining unit by property, you know, I think we would be setting ourselves up to eventually adding many over time, potentially. And so I'm not opposed to that, but I do think it's worth being aware. And, you know, I guess from my perspective, it to me, it seems perhaps more punitive to label a property than it is to label a district, which, you know, I mean, in my neighborhood, you know, is a very diverse one. And there are homes that are very expensive single family homes and right next to, you know, rental buildings where that are far more affordable. And so, you know, I don't know that you know, for me, I'm not sure that the concern about labeling is really the issue, when the issue is not so much the label that we're placing, but the fact that the problem exists and everybody knows it. You know, that these properties are not being taken care of as they should be. So, I would also love to hear more again about these other municipalities and then look at their data as well. So since those programs have been in place, have they seen, evictions gone down? Have they seen a reduction in the number of violations that have occurred? What are the benefits, and looking to see too, how the structure of the program has, impacted those results that they've seen. I am hoping that you could share more information specifically about Fairfax and Newport News. As I understand, Newport News has 3 defined districts, and then in the map that you showed, that Fairfax City is essentially defined through the census tracts, most of the city. I guess with the Fairfax system, is it specifically just properties that are in their choice voucher program, or is it broader than that? And I'm also curious just about the funding, because if I was reading the documentation that was shared correctly, it appeared that in Fairfax, in order to have a rental unit, you essentially had to get a rental permit, and there was a cost associated with the rental permit. I think that they were looking to increase it perhaps from like $75 to $150, something like that. And it sounded like those fees were helpful in funding the program. And so, if that's the case, so is it possible to basically have a rental permit? And if we have a rental permit, would that help us to be able to enforce issues more efficiently? Because obviously with the violations in place, if you don't, if you're not addressing them, then you wouldn't have the permit. And then would a more broad definition of the program and the inspection fees captured also help to fund the program so that we would have the inspectors in place. So so those are my initial questions. If they fall under the category of questions, I'm not even sure about that.
I think I received them. Let me see if I can tackle them in order. 57% households are renter households in the city of Richmond. So we're a majority renter city. That I'll say has varied a little bit recently between 55 and 60, but the latest data is 57% renters in the city. One of the things that I think I can commit to, and if we look at how we do this, and again, 2 parts, as maybe primary legislation comes through, I can bring this body council data in terms of just some of the history that we've talked about in terms of access to mapping out, right? Where have the code violations been in the past, and starting to map those out, and maybe even getting into a little more granular detail of like which violations have actually resulted in notices of unsafe, unfit, where we've actually had to deem them unoccupiable. So I think the next time that I come back here to discuss the legislation, I can provide some of that data for you. In terms of your question about Fairfax, we have not looked at Newport News, but that can again be one that we discuss. As for creating the rental inspection district, when you create that district, it is any rental property, residential rental property within that district that is subject to inspection. And so whether that's, public housing, private housing, Section 8, any rental unit is subject to those inspections, that there's no discernation among different types. And then in terms of rental registry, so in terms of like funding, one of the things you looked at is, right, how do you fund the program? One of the ways that some communities have done is, look, here's what we charge for a building code, for new construction, here's what we charge for an inspection to come out. In the city, it's $32 or $60, depending on the case, right? So you do an inspection, you charge the inspection, we come out and charge you for that, and charge for every reinspection. That is one method. Another is some type of rental registry. The city, I believe, is authorized to do a rental registry. That is not something that we do have currently. Ultimately, that would be a policy decision whether or not to establish one, and set fees and therefore. But we do not have one currently.
I think that there would definitely be value in having that potentially. Also because of the data that it would provide, I think would be helpful to see. Because I think we can't talk about affordable housing if we don't have a really concrete way of being able to measure it. I think that all that sounds good. I appreciate the openness to getting the additional data and looking at more specifically those programs that are in place. I appreciated the comments of Councilwoman Robinson in terms of needing a timeline. Given I think Fairfax established this in 2012, Newport News in 2016, and this is a city that with residents who certainly deserve to be in safe homes. And so I think looking at something quick is like, let's get it done. And the final point I wanted to make in terms of the sunset that was noted in the presentation of 10 years. I think that ultimately we want to fix the problems. And I would be personally more supportive of a sunset if it was tied to certain quantitative benchmarks. So if the property had gone through a period of not having, violations or and several cycles of not having an issue, that potentially that they could exit the program or the district might be modified, but or perhaps, if given that I think more supportive of a broader district, that perhaps then the cadence of the inspections could be reduced to be more spaced apart, something like that. But that you would, that changing the program or revising the district would be tied to seeing results in terms of the improvements that are being made, rather than kind of putting in place what I think is perhaps an artificial timeline of 10 years, which, if hopefully we would see change before then, but if those issues are still there, then I would see not a reason to change it. So those are my thoughts on that. I appreciate your time and work on this. As we're moving into this budget cycle, I think that looking with some expediency in terms of the recommendations from a staffing standpoint, even we just put a line in the sand. It is important to me that we've considered that. And if it is self-funded through the fees, that's fine too. But I would like to have some understanding about that, so that it's not something that we then say, okay, well, now we don't have it in the budget. So I would like for us to be able to make sure that we have the information so that it can be in next year's budget. Because again, the citizens have indicated a need, and it's our obligation to address it. Thank you.
Madam Clerk, is Ms. Lynch still online? Oh, okay, she dropped off. All right. Thank you so much for all of your information. Thank you to everyone that came out this afternoon to talk about this matter. I think this is a really good conversation. To think about going last, most of my colleagues asked all my questions that I had. I did have one that we talked about the different areas, but if there's a way that we could potentially get any best practices, so like, with Henrico, for instance, versus like Fairfield, where they did a whole city, what was the best practices that we could use as a city as we're moving forward. I had a lot of other questions regarding the fiscal impact. And I think the question was asked about how many inspectors we would need on this, right? Okay. And then I guess what metrics will be used to make sure that this program is a success is definitely something I think that would be helpful. And then how the community will be engaged specifically. A lot of times now, a lot of the way that it is coming to us is in a form of a complaint or in the form of, other groups and organizers. But now, how are we going to be proactive to actually engage the community as well? Is something that I'd be interested in learning more about as we develop the ordinance and really begin to think about how to institute this program. But I think this has been great conversation. I think we are off to a great start and really beginning to look at this from a city-wide perspective of how and what we need to do. So I look forward to receiving the ordinance, as my colleague stated, and we can discuss the next steps from there.
Great.
Thank
Thanks for your
you.
time.
Yeah. Next, we'll have a presentation by, well, not a presentation, but
Are y'all ready to proceed with item 1? Okay, thank you. Item 1, ordinance 2025-041, to authorize the CAO to execute a National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant agreement between the city and the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for the purpose of funding green infrastructure improvements at Wickham Community Park. That paper is before the committee.
Madam Clerk, do we have anyone here for public comment?
Is there anyone here present today that would like to speak in support of item 1? Is there anyone here present that would like to speak in opposition of item 1? Seeing none, the public hearing is now closed. Bring it back to the body.
Madam Chair, I motion to move this forward with recommendation for approval, but I did ask for a status report on the park at Wickham and where we are, and in the actual implementation of the plans that are done there to create this park. And I don't know that I've received that response. I could have. I've been pretty tied up all day. But if someone would reach back out to parks and let them know that we need to get an update on the status of implementation and how this grant agreement, what role it plays in carrying this out.
Good afternoon, Chair Jones, Vice Chair Robertson, Councilmember Breton. I did speak with Chris Frelke this morning about this specific grant.
I have spoken with him, but I've also spoken with Ryan, who's the project manager for it, and he's kept me informed. I'm just looking for a status update.
And what they told me, because Ryan was also on the call with us this morning, that if the grant does get approved, they expect to be able to break ground on this playground in about 2 to 3 months.
Oh, okay.
All right.
Thank you. I thought you said weeks.
Do we have a second?
I second the motion.
The committee is voting on the motion to forward item 1, ordinance 2025-041, to council with the recommendation to approve. Mr. Breton?
Aye.
Vice Chair Robertson?
Aye.
Chair Jones?
Aye.
That motion has been approved. Item 2, Resolution 2024 R041 to express support for the study and installation of photo speed monitor devices in high-risk intersection segments, including the 600 and 700 blocks of South Belvedere Street and certain other locations throughout the city throughout the city for the Department of Police Safety Camera Program, and to request that the CAO consider identifying additional locations for the installation of photo speed monitor devices and increasing the number of photo speed monitor devices deployed by the city. That paper is before the committee.
Madam Clerk, do we have anyone here for public comment?
Is there anyone here present today that would like to speak in support of item 2? Is there anyone here present that would like to speak in opposition of item 2? Seeing none, the public hearing is now closed. Bring it back to the body.
Well, I guess my question is that last time we were here 2 months ago, we requested a study of the likely intersections across the city that would warrant potentially being considered for speed cameras. And that was the information that we were looking for that was going to help us to make a decision about this paper. So I would like to know how soon we will get that study, because I believe we have not gotten it. I guess I'll also make a comment that I know there has been some discussion about state law that is pending that is related to this, but I also believe that that state law really has no bearing on the criteria of intersections that we would be making a judgment on. So I would not expect us to wait for that law to be signed before going forward with this research. So I'm wondering if anyone can speak to how soon we'll be able to see a list of intersections that are likely to be included or recommended as potential candidates for speed cameras.
Is there anyone here that could speak to this? Okay, call is coming.
Good afternoon, Council Chair, Vice Chair, and Council members. I apologize. Mr. Winston had to step away for a moment, but he did leave a statement for you. And it's the understanding, excuse me, I'm sorry. The understanding from DPW and working with staff is the paper would be continued based upon a decision by the state and the governor's office pertaining to the traffic camera usage statewide.
All right. Well, I guess I would, whether or not we continue the paper, I think is a separate question from whether or not we expect to see the information about high traffic and incident intersections and corridors in the city. I think we need that information anyways, and I don't want to wait for the state law to get that information. So I would still reiterate my request for that information, and I would even suggest that we not wait for the next meeting to get it. I'd like to see it in between the next meetings. I mean, just in an email. I would like to get like a list of intersections ahead of time. I don't want to wait another month or two before getting information. So we can discuss what we're going to do about this paper, but I know that information request still stands, and I don't want to wait for the next month to see it.
Okay, I'm not sure. So it would be beneficial to have more insight as to what the state is proposing as the reason why we want to consider what the state position is. And Madam Chair, I'd just like to say that, we continue these papers for a purpose. And once we continue the papers, it's with the intention that we'll get the information that we need so we can make a decision and move to the next level. And I would hope that the administration would be more responsive to try to get us that information prior to the committee meeting, if possible, so that we would at least know what it is. And if there is a proposed recommendation that we do something different based on, in this case, state proposed legislation, which may be a perfect solution for us, but it would be beneficial if we were informed as to why you found what the state is proposing to be a reasonable, good option for us to consider. And when that is not done in an informative way, it's not acceptable. So, and I've done this stuff long enough that sometimes we decide to make a decision to move forward with a recommendation for approval, only to say that if we do that, then maybe we'll get back what we've asked for to make a more informed decision. I don't like to do that because I'd rather have the full information and make an informed decision about this. But if we are only continuing it and 30 days from now, the response will be similar to what I've experienced today, I would be quite disappointed.
And I'd just like to
Ma'am?
add,
Ma'am, oh,
Yeah.
I'll let her go ahead. See if I can help her.
yeah,
May I address the chair? Thank you, Madam Chair. May I make a recommendation? I know that the Police Department and the Public Works Department have been working together to create a PowerPoint presentation. Part of the internal discussion within the administration is that this appears to be more of a public safety issue than a land use issue, but something that we believe that all of the council members are probably very concerned about. And there was a recommendation that perhaps the presentation should be made at either the next informal council meeting or the organizational development meeting at the beginning of April. I do know that there is a draft presentation that is prepared. It just hasn't been signed off on yet by the administration.
thank you, Ms. Ebert. I'd just like to add that this information was brought to us during the planning, prior to this meeting. And while consideration can be made around whether or not this belongs in land use or public safety, the initial request was for DPW to bring forward this information because they were the ones who had it. The last meeting, the police was here and spoke to this paper as well as DPW, and they stated that they would bring this information forward. Now it seems like we doing all these different things and whatever is happening. And as my colleague, Mr. Breton stated, the study was requested in land use. And so we need to bring that information to land use so then we can make an informed decision on what needs to happen next. It seems like we're jumping to next steps without even doing what we've asked to be presented here at land use. So I think before we can close it out, we need to actually address what was requested to begin with.
Understood.
Amy Robbins, 5th District Liaison to Councilmember Stephanie Lynch. Apologize, she had to drop off of the call earlier. I think right at this point, it would be amazing if we could just move this forward with no recommendation to the full council or to redirect it to public safety if that's a better place for it to go for the police to comment as well. Again, this is just asking for circles to be drawn around intersections throughout the entire city of where we've lost people who've died in intersections that are 1,000 feet from a school. And the state allows us to consider putting additional traffic safety, traffic calming measures in these intersections that are 1,000 feet from a school, not necessarily in a school zone. It's an expansion. We don't have to act on it. It took us over 2.5 years to actually get the photo speed ticketing on the ground once we had the ability to do it. So we're just asking for what you all are asking for, what you all asked for 2 months ago. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I feel very strongly. Well, I supported continuing this paper because there are several locations probably throughout the city, and one over the other is the challenge that I'm confronting with. And so I strongly feel that a comprehensive recommendation based on the research that we expect DPW in partnership with police to provide would give us enough information to make an informed decision. So if Mr. Vincent is prepared to help us with that, I am all ears. Because I do think it's important that we make the right decision as it relates to this. And if, Madam Chair, if you will, Mr. Vincent, that would be grateful. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Bobby Vincent, Director of Public Works. My apologies, I had to step out momentarily. So with regards to this paper, it's my understanding that we were communicating with staff about continuing this paper and any other papers that resemble this paper until the governor made a decision, which his decision is supposed to be made within the next week or so as it pertains to cameras within the public right-of-way for traffic. And so the team was under the impression that this paper was a part of that continuation.
Mr. Vincent, what is it about what the governor is proposing that you feel it warrants? What do you know about that, and what's in that warrant us waiting for the governor's decision? Because what we had requested was more specifically as it relates to the city itself.
Correct.
And us being able to determine, what potential locations that we should consider this. And I understand, if I'm right in assuming that maybe the legislation that is being proposed will give us more flexibility than we currently have.
Right.
But it still doesn't address specifically how we would go about identifying these locations and the process of carrying out this resolution
Right.
At the city level.
From my understanding is that with regards to the quantity. So the quantity of cameras right now within the public right of way as it relates to traffic is a concern and an issue for localities. So we made the decision to have one placed at a specified location based upon the quantity that we were in fact allowed to place within the public right of way that could pose a situation there. So that's why the team was under the impression that this paper was also to be continued with the others. Now, the good news is that as it relates to a traffic study for the entire city with regards to speed, that traffic study was completed in January. And that was that information with regards to the 95th percentile and the 85th percentile was presented at Informal last week as a part of that presentation. So we do have the data. That's the good news with regards to being able to determine what the speed and the impacts are at various intersections throughout the city, as well as on the high injury network. But we just felt that it would be best if this paper could be continued, so that way we can make a conscious decision on where to have cameras placed within the public right of way as it relates to traffic, based upon what the state gave us in terms of standard operating procedures. So right now, I think a part of the camera system network is based upon population. We're 10%. So with us having 230,000 people, 23 cameras could be allowed. It's been documentation like that that's been floating throughout the General Assembly based upon current papers and future papers. So the team just wanted to wait until after that decision was made.
Yeah, I'm interested to know more, and I may even ask our attorney to possibly comment on this about, the legislation and if you have an understanding of the state legislation and whether it's a speed camera, a red light camera, all cameras, and maybe I'm not sure if it's too short term of a question to ask you, but do you know more precisely if speed cameras are going to be impacted by state law?
Did that work? I did have a chance to simply read over the bill. So I'm not really in a position at this point to advise or even specifically say definitively the effects of the bill. What I do know is that in terms of what the resolution addresses, there doesn't seem to be a change to anything but what the terms are called. So a photo speed camera is now a speed, they're definitional changes. The distance from the school zone, those sorts of things have not changed. There are additional automated tools that are authorized by the legislation, but there are also a number of requirements that are additionally placed on localities when they implement these tools, particularly the additional ones. And those are where the real policy questions would need to be answered. It looks like some of the locations would line up and would match, and there would be more tools, but there would also be more requirements, more fiscal impact, more things like that. So I hope that's helpful. It's simply informational. I understand. If you'd like us to look into anything in more detail or further, we already have folks in our office who have been monitoring this legislation and working on it. So we would be happy if you want to send along any additional questions to look into those for you.
And two, if I could add one thing too, right now, clarification based upon the type of cameras is a big thing. So right now, we have permission to do the school cameras, which we have already been doing. In addition to school cameras, we're looking at red light cameras. In addition to red light cameras, we're also looking at speed cameras. So the red light cameras, all of this legislation is in the process of going through at the state level, which is going to provide us with additional state funding. So right now, without us having to pay for stuff, and we've done a great job of obtaining state funding and federal funding. We just feel as though that it would be a better decision made once all of those determinations at the state level were made, and then we wouldn't have to pay for certain things that we wind up legislating on at this point in time. So right now, as I shared with you all last week.
Madam Chair, motion to continue in the Land Use Committee.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I appreciate you all. Thank you.
I second that motion.
Thank you very much.
Can you sing that song?
And we are continuing this for 30 days, correct? All right, thank you. The committee is voting on the motion to continue item 2, resolution 2024 R041 to the April 22nd Land Use, Housing, and Transportation Standing Committee meeting. Mr. Breton?
Aye.
Vice Chair Robertson? Chair Jones?
Aye.
That motion has been approved. Item 3, resolution 2025 R012 to designate the property known as 809 Oliver Hill Way as a revitalization area. That papers before the committee.
Madam Clerk, can we hold a public hearing on this?
Yes, ma'am. Is there anyone here present today that would like to speak in support of item 3? Is there anyone here that would like to speak in opposition of item 3? Seeing none, the public hearing is now closed. Bring it back to the body.
Madam Chair, motion to approve.
Second.
The committee is voting on the motion to forward item 3, resolution 2025-012 to council with the recommendation to approve. Mr. Breton?
Aye.
Vice Chair Robertson?
Aye.
Chair Jones?
Aye.
That motion has been approved.
Madam Clerk, staff report.
Yes, the staff report has been provided by council staff. You should have it in front of you.
I can second that for you. We have nothing additional, though. Thank you. I cannot sing it, Ms. Robertson.
You got it. Seeing we have no other further business, this meeting is adjourned.